journalists Glenn Greenwald, Jeremy Scahill, Laura Poitras, and their patron Pierre Omidyar have postured and preened as the hip, chic vanguards fighting against the surveillance state. But are they really?
Scahill's too stupid to be a useful... I mean, he's a useful idiot. He's not a tool. He's too dumb.
This week, a special report on Washington Babylon podcast about the true nature of the Intercept website. Ken,
Okay.
We have been running a series of articles over this week dealing with the Intercept, and so I guess the opening question is, what's the point and why?
Well, I've been thinking about the Intercept a lot lately, and whether listeners believe it or not, I try not to think much about the Intercept, and I really rarely do. It puts out, periodically will put out something interesting, but not terribly often, so I don't really pay much attention to it. But people keep writing me about it and giving me information, and I think about it from time to time because, of course, I was one of the original hires, and I was hired in late 2014 and left in early 2015 because I could barely write there. And I wrote about my experience there for Politico in a story called Where Journalism Goes to Die, which came out, that would have been in 2015. And that story said, the place was a shit show, that it was like a lot of tech startups, that Omidyar was basically an idiot and overrated, which I still think. But I didn't see anything nefarious going on. More recently, I've started thinking that it really is not, the problems there at the beginning and now are not because the Intercept is a screw-up. It's because it's a success, that it was designed by U.S. or some foreign intelligence service, that they approached Omidyar, a tech guy, eBay, deep ties to Silicon Valley, which we all know is deeply linked to the CIA and intelligence agencies. I think they approached them and said, do you want to help us create what looks like an independent left-wing news site, and we're going to use it to hire a bunch of left-wingers, give them tons of money, and have them not write. We'll take them out of circulation. Meanwhile, we'll also convince whistleblowers that the Intercept is the go-to place and that they should be leaking to the Intercept. And so it would be sort of one-stop shopping for whistleblowers. The U.S. government, by sponsoring the Intercept with Omidyar's help, could collect all of these leaks and identify leakers and prosecute them, all the while looking like it was being relentlessly, the intelligence community was being relentlessly criticized by this independent left-wing outlet. Look what's happened. I mean, Matthew Cole of the Intercept and Jeremy Scahill put Reality Winner in jail. Or in prison. There's no other way around it. They accidentally, and maybe it was accidental. I have my doubts, especially with Cole. But they exposed her, and she was arrested, prosecuted, and is in prison. Matthew Cole previously worked for ABC News, where he exposed and had put in prison John Kiriakou, formerly with the CIA, the only man who went to prison for his role in the CIA torture program of the so-called War on Terror. John Kiriakou exposed the torture. He was a whistleblower, and he went to prison for that. Nobody who actually conducted torture went to prison. Matthew Cole put him in prison. Then how does a guy like that get hired by the Intercept? Why, after he outs, accidentally or not, and I don't think it was an accident, but I'm just speculating, after he puts Kiriakou in prison, why is it that the Intercept would go to someone like that? So I think all along it's been, and people should read my story at WashingtonBabylon.com. The title, it won't be the lead story by the time people listen to it, by the time you listen to this, but it's a story called "Is the Intercept an Intelligence Operation in Ongoing Inquiry?" They'll find it on the website. There's a picture of Omidyar with Richard Branson, the Virgin CEO, who is clearly a tool of the U.S. intelligence in Venezuela. He's been sponsoring a lot of opposition rallies and events and clearly working with U.S. intelligence to undermine the government there. So I believe those two belong to each other, with each other. They're both tools of the U.S. government. Anyway, that's the story in a nutshell.
Right. Before we go into some of the content we've had with great writers this week, I want to just briefly give listeners the understanding that the idea of what Noam Chomsky calls controlled dissent being sponsored by the U.S. government in one form or another is not a new concept. We can go back to the Cold War with things like the various magazines like Commentary and Dissent or others, and so you probably know what I'm talking about.
I do. I mean, the CIA has a long history of sponsoring media outlets and journalists. Starting at, the CIA dates to the Cold War. I mean, it was the OSS before that, but going back to the Cold War period, they were sponsoring allegedly independent journalists here and abroad. So this would hardly be shocking, actually. I mean, it's entirely in keeping with past practice of the CIA and of the journalism community, for lack of a better word.
So let's talk briefly about Tim Sharrock's writing that we've run on Washington Babylon.
Well, Tim's, one of the best reporters in D.C., great reporter on Korea. I mean, a great reporter on lots of things, but I would say his specialties are intelligence world, private contractors, and Korea. And I wanted him to write, he actually pitched a story, and I wanted him to write it for us because, I'm a lightning rod with the Intercept because I quit, wrote about it, have frequently criticized the Intercept, put them on our 2017 hack list. I'm sure they'll be on the 2019 hack list. Last year, unfortunately, I didn't have time to do it. But, Sharrock is pretty much unimpeachable. So he wrote a long piece that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but our readers can find it on our website. And it asks, why did Omidyar shut down the Snowden archive, which was just announced last week? Which is also rather curious. Glenn Greenwald had pretty much exclusive access to the Snowden archive, along with Laura Poitras. And both of them end up getting hired by Pierre Omidyar and paid huge sums of money, and neither of them has produced much. Glenn, prior to going to the Intercept, was I used to read him. I used to like him. I always thought he was, dogmatic, but he could muster a case. He could make an argument because he's a lawyer after all. He's not a journalist. He's he's a bloviator, an opinionator, a pundit. He does no reporting. But he could make a case because of his legal training. Anyway, he and Laura and Scahill, who does this pathetic movie, Dirty Wars. There's actually, I wish I could find it. If anybody out there can find this, I will pay $10 for this. Scahill was in Somalia. This was on his Facebook or Twitter. I think it was Facebook. I used to have a copy. I could possibly dig it up. But he was in Somalia with the tribal chieftain or sheikh. And he was making the, like the hip-hop inverted peace sign. I mean, he's a total clown. But all these people get hired and paid a lot of money by Omidyar. And none of them really write very much. Scahill had previously written this horrendous book called Blackwater about a good target. Blackwater, now, I don't even know what it's called now, Eric Prince's private intelligence shop, private mercenary firm. Fine, great target, but he turned in, some document dump that Betsy Reed, who's now the editor at The Intercept, then at The Nation, edited into something resembling a book. I never saw it, but I heard Scahill was on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart twice. The first time, Stewart accidentally dropped. It was like the book is really thick, and he knocked it off the table, and it made this huge sound. And he treated Scahill very rudely, the way he should have. And then he had him back on because Stewart, after all, is polite and bipartisan, as we all know. So he had him back on. Apparently, a second time it was nicer. I never saw either of these things. Anyway, all these clowns, useful idiots, useful tools of Pierre Omidyar, and I'm speculating, of course, but apparently useful tools of Omidyar in the U.S. or a foreign intelligence agency were hired up. And, now the Snowden archive has been shut down, and, 94% of it, 95, 98% of it has never been seen. The whole idea was they were going to share the Snowden archive with journalists and publish this explosive information, the Snowden leaks, right? Well, how is it that the Intercept locks up the Snowden leaks? All these years, they barely released any of it. When I worked at the Intercept, they built a safe to safeguard the Snowden leaks, the Snowden documents. And very little of it's ever seen the light of day. And now, like I said, just last week, they announced they made staff cutbacks of 4%, which is a forerunner. That publication is going down the tubes. It served its purpose. It's been exposed as a fraud, as a potential intelligence gathering operation, not just gathering, an active measures operation. So I expect, what's the point? It's been a joke. Its cover is blown. Omidyar can keep pouring money in, but why did they already announce 4% staff cutbacks? And I would think now that, I don't need to take all the credit. Lots of people have been writing for years about this. Yasha Levine, Mark Ames, Shorak. There have been some other critics. I'm amiss, I'm sure, in not mentioning some, but, its cover is getting very, very thin. And even Omidyar and his handlers must see it as a waste of money at this point. So I expect it will go the way of, publications like the Weekly Standard, right. Bill Kristol's old magazine that was one of the big advocates for the war in Iraq, leading advocate. I'm not sure the CIA would have had to pay Bill Kristol. He's such a tool. So I'm not trying to make an analogy here. I think Omidyar had to set up these left-wing journalists, in which I was initially, hired and approached, and then quit in frustration. It took me 4 years to sort of piece together this puzzle.
Right.
So,
and this is all pure speculation on my side, but one of the major elements of the CIA and various other intelligence agencies worldwide, the toolkit of espionage in regards to Iran is a left-wing terrorist organization. I'm going to murder the pronunciation because it's Persian, but it's Mujahideen al-Haq, which is...
that's probably pretty close. It's MEK.
The MEK.
Better known, yeah.
And since Omidyar is Iranian, it might...
Yes.
I don't want to play guilt by association purely on his heritage, but it's a reasonable way to think about whether there's a connection there.
I totally agree with you, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I've been reluctant to mention that Omidyar is Iranian heritage. And, I'm a critic of the mullahs, needless to say, in Iran. And, I wish there was a different government there. I don't believe it. There's no pro-Western constituency there, so you can't replace it. It's just like Iraq. You can't replace the Iranian government with a pro-Western government. Because pro-Western, it's not a Western country. It's a Persian country. It's a great nation. It deserves better leadership, but not leadership handpicked and sponsored by the CIA, which we've seen in the past. Their president, Mossadegh, which I'm probably butchering, was overthrown in 1954, and they replaced him with the Shah. So, there's a lengthy or an interesting history, and the CIA is still desperately attempting to reach the Iranian people. And Omidyar is probably a tool of the intelligence community in multiple ways. And again, like you, I'm just speculating aloud here. I have no direct evidence of this. I just know there are a lot of other people who have similar views who are increasingly being vocal about their views. Barrett Brown, who's about to be on, is definitely worth listening to. I don't want to talk a lot about his interview because you can listen to him for yourselves, but he worked at the Intercept. He knows Glenn. He had an interesting relationship with Glenn. He admired Glenn. He sent Glenn lots of information. Glenn initially expressed interest in publishing it, but lo and behold, never did, or published very little of it. Some really damaging stuff. But I think Barrett can talk about that better than I can, so I will leave it to Barrett coming up next.
Barrett, thanks very much for being on with us today. We're going to be talking a lot about the Intercept and writing and publishing a lot of stories at Washington Babylon this week about the Intercept and what it is and what its origins were. And some of what we're talking about is speculation, and some of it is hard fact. Certainly, I think anyone who is interested in the Intercept and some of the well-known journalists there should read our stories with an open mind and start asking questions about what the Intercept is all about. In your case, what I really want to get at is your relationship with Glenn Greenwald, how it began quickly. We don't need to dwell a lot on that. But the key part, based on our prior conversations, is that it seems like Glenn had been very, very interested in hearing about some companies that your hack exposed that were spying on him and other activists. And this was, if I understand correctly, prior to the Intercept being launched. And then suddenly, even though he had initially been outraged, and one would expect so, since the hack showed that these companies, H.V. Gary, Palantir, as I recall, were spying on him and other activists, he suddenly lost interest in the topic and then stopped returning calls and messages from you. And it didn't, other than a few stories, pre-Intercept, I believe, just lost interest in what should have been a really, a perfect story for a guy who wants to help out whistleblowers and spread alarms about the national security state. And then lastly, I know this is a lot to keep track of. I've got a list if we need to come back to this, but it's not a lot of questions. But lastly, what happened, do you think, with him in terms of failing to pursue this story? With Snowden, Glenn had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the story. He almost blew that story. Now we know also that the Snowden archives have been locked up at the Intercept now for an indefinite period of time after PRO Media, built a safe at the Intercept offices when I worked there. The Snowden archives has never really been exposed, and now they probably never will be. But was it lazy? Was he just like, this is too much work? The same thing that happened with Snowden in your case, or was there something else going on? And I realize you may have to speculate, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, not a problem. He's been a sort of a looming figure in my life for almost a decade now. We first met when he wrote about, or he quoted an article I'd written about Michael Hastings, and we talked on and off about a year, every once in a while. And then what happened was the Team Themis conspiracy, which is too complicated to get into here, was revealed in a hack by Anonymous at the time when I was working with a portion of Anonymous on some things like Tunisia. That got me into this intelligence contracting issue that I continued to pursue for about a year and a half until I went to prison. He, at first, obviously, was very interested in all of this. I have some email correspondence with him from back then, and I'm sort of bringing him some after the fact kind of other information about this conspiracy that was directed at him and other journalists, the children of labor leaders by these companies, H.B. Gary, Palantir, In-Game Systems, and so over the next couple of days, I send him some other information sort of related to that, and he asked me to call him at some point. We never actually ended up getting through to each other. Never actually talked to him on the phone back then, and that's indicative right there. He obviously had other interests, and so nonetheless, as over the next year, as I pursued these same companies, including Palantir, the one that had really lied to him and not just targeted him in these proposals, and not just intended to go after him, But the president of the company, Alex Cart, called him and apologized and said, "Oh, this we didn't know about this." That turned out to be false, and Glenn knows it's false because he wrote about it a few days after me and him spoke about some of these other issues. The fact that they blamed it on a lone employee. That lone employee, in fact, was actually involved with several other employees, including their chief counsel in this operation. There's basically just all this stuff, the sort of stuff that New York Times tried to cover and then lost interest in as well, right around the time that Palantir promoted that employee. It's just the whole thing was very sordid. Anyway, but my impression was that he just was not interested in this issue of intelligence contracting, surveillance, or he was interested in the broad, as a civil liberties issue or whatever else he's interested in. But the actual nuances and the details of Booz Allen Hamilton, Palantir in-game systems, all these things I was writing to him about over the next year, just didn't interest him. Now the one we do correspond again about a year after that, about March 2012. April 2012, and this is a month after I've been raided by the FBI. And you'll remember, he knew Michael Hastings. I knew Michael Hastings. That's how we had met when I read about Michael Hastings. Michael Hastings had around then, after a few days before this article came out that I wrote to him about, had posted my search warrant that the FBI had used in this raid against me. The search warrant listed these same companies: in-game systems, HP Gary, a few others, my journalism project, Project PM, and the website on which we compiled all these data. The raid, the investigation, which had started secretly right after we had come across these things targeting Glenn, had been about this. I mean, I had thrown myself, along with some other people, who some of whom are still suffering the consequences, thrown ourselves sort of into this maelstrom to protect journalists and to pursue this issue, which we thought was not just a one-off thing. We didn't think it was just an instance of they did some. I mean, these companies were clearly they suffered no consequences for any of this. And we knew, based on the things we kept finding in the emails after the press had kind of lost interest, that there was some extraordinarily dangerous tendencies here and dangerous capabilities. And so I sent them all this, and the next time we talked was, again, like April 2012. I mentioned, hey, here's my new article that I just put out for The Guardian about this other similar situation where Loney, another intelligence contracting firm, had been caught going after another journalist. And sort of referencing your situation a year ago and referencing these other capabilities like persona management and things that can be used for mass propaganda. And then I tell them, please look into persona management. I'll explain briefly before I actually quote this. Persona management was the capability that was discovered in these emails that has since sort of been lost to media history, that the New York Times has forgotten about it to the extent that they've actually rediscovered it in the last few months. Via this company, Group in Israel, that was trying to help Trump with these fake online people that are very sophisticated, that use automated software to facilitate all that, blah, blah. It was back then, it was called persona management. I tell them, please look into persona management. This is extraordinarily important. The public needs to understand it, and I'm going to have a hard time haranguing people about these issues from prison. Right. No reply from him. And that's the point I realized shortly after that that obviously, look, this guy he's a flawed character. I've always admired him for a lot of the work he did over the last 7 years prior, when I was a younger, more, I guess, naive journalist. But that set the tone for the relationship going forward. I didn't talk to him again until a couple of years later when I was in prison. Between that time, people helping me out with the donation campaign had to lobby him, about some months after I'd been arrested, to write about my case. And he didn't really mention the fact that the companies that this was about were the ones targeting him. Didn't mention he didn't allow the implied obligation to slip in. But he did write about the case.
Oversight,
yeah.
That these were the very same firms that had targeted him.
Yeah, and it was. Yeah. It was something that bothered me, obviously, but it was just there was so much else to be bothered about back then. But then when I recently went through these emails, for the first time in years, the last couple of weeks, and I see that I talked to him specifically about these companies, Archimedes, Palantir's other operations, persona management. These are things that later came up in 2016, along with Cambridge Analytica. to undermine the election using data mining on Facebook. So later on, I go to prison. He does that one article about my case, which was obviously very helpful. It did help to raise some money and help bring attention to what this is all about. And then, meantime, I start writing this column for D Magazine, my hometown weekly or monthly paper, and the column becomes very popular. And he has me column after I'm sentenced, and asks me if they can take the column at the Intercept. So I do that. I win the National Magazine Award and the New York Writers Guild or Journalists Guild. I don't know, a couple other awards that I was happy to beat the New Yorker. That was the one thing that really mattered to me. But anyways, so I've done some things that contributed to the Intercept at that time, and did so from prison. In fact, from a segregation cell. And so I don't really ask much in return. They did pay me very well. That was great. But I'm still trying to write about some of these issues in the Intercept, and I'm getting flack from the editor there, Roger Hodge, who was a nice guy, I think, as you know, but not.
Yeah, he was my editor at Harper's.
Yeah, exactly. And he was not on the ball here. He was arguing with me about it. That really disenchants me with the Intercept, and that was about a few months after I got out of prison. I did end up quitting because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And then Greenwald was upset. He said, "I really wish you would come and talk to me about this before you quit." And given I guess he didn't know that I tried to talk to him about much more important things in the past, and had just sort of given up that habit. It doesn't seem to work with them. So to answer your question about again, so these were companies again that had Archimedes itself, which was directly involved back then in these same things, and then harnessed these same things in the U.S. election in a way that I think is now widely acknowledged. This could have been it. So in response to your question as to why does he do this? Why did he not feel interest? There's a couple of different, I think, cogent possibilities, and there's one possibility that there's something amiss here in the sense that we need not go into. There's something amiss, but I think it's perfectly plausible that he is simply a lazy, inattentive person who doesn't really have that. He doesn't get up at night and say, "Oh my God, am I missing something important? Like, is there something that I could have done today that I guarantee that's never happened?" And there's just so much about him that has confused and really disgusted me since. There's no point getting into at length, but that's my basic assessment, my executive summary on that.
And what about the impact? Because you mentioned Cambridge Analytica, and the 2016 election. Well, let's confirm that clearly was involved. What can you be more specific, just in terms of your own assessment?
Yeah, certainly.
Impact on the 2016 election.
Yeah, certainly. So Archimedes Global back then was one of several of the major partners in this recompete attempt to try to win the contract for the Romos Point program. And Archimedes Global, they ended up sharing a vice president. Their vice president also would work at Cambridge Analytica a bit later and during the election. She's one of the centerpieces of all this, and she's mentioned only in one article at this point by Politico. Actually, they actually did a surprisingly good job on that. But so back then, no one had heard of
What's her name? I'm sorry.
I'll have to pull it up on my thing here. What is her name? It is.
And while you're doing that, Barrett,
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but while you're doing that, I just want to make sure that to remind listeners that you've got a book coming out that's going to be extraordinary. Can you talk about that? Can we just talk about when your book? Do you have a title yet? When's it going to be published? I know it's not until next year, but I want to get in a major promo now. And after the book comes out, of course, we'll be wanting to talk to you afterwards and before, I'm sure. But can you talk about your book at all? Because
certainly.
You can do that after, but yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we were already. It's coming out in February 2020, which is good because there's some things that are still coming out these days. So I'm glad we didn't finish it earlier. It's a good thing I procrastinate. It's coming out from Farrar, Straus and Giroux. The title is My Glorious Defeats. And the subtitle, if I let's see here, it's Hacktivist, Narcissist, Anonymous, a Memoir. So it's something of a memoir, but it's a memoir and a lot of polemic, a lot of expository. It ends up, even though it covers Anonymous and prison and all these things and the intelligence contract industry, it's also largely about the press and the press's failures, large and small, and just sort of the day-to-day, just the vagaries and the haphazardness that has. I think become more evidently uh, deadly. I mean, literally and metaphorically.
More evidently, what?
Deadly. I mean, the consequences of just mundane, day to day, sort of just careerism and just amoralism in the press that I try to document in this book it's an extent. It goes to an extent that still surprises me. And I was a press critic for a long time, and I've dealt with the press for a long time in different ways, including as a sort of a contact for anonymous for elements of anonymous back in the golden age of that sort of thing. And again, I thought I was done being surprised by the behavior that I saw.
So, listeners, we are going to syndicate now a segment from the Counterpunch Radio podcast with Eric Draitser, and he interviewed the mother of Reality Winner, Billie Winner Davis. Ken, what are your feelings about the Reality Winner case in the hindsight of what you've put forward about the Intercept being in actuality?
Well, initially it looked like they had screwed up yet again. And, by screwing up and sending, just unexplainable why they would send documents that they sent to a government source, apparently by accident, they claim. And from those documents, the government source could immediately identify who had obtained the documents and who had leaked them to the Intercept. That's how they caught her so quickly. It was a rookie mistake, or it was something worse than that. So Reality Winner went to prison as a result of the Intercept screwing up, and there was never any accountability at the place. Afterwards, nobody got fired for this. This is Matthew Cole has now put 2 people in prison. 2 whistleblowers are in prison at least. I could be missing somebody, but at least 2. Reality Winner and John Kiriakou went to prison. One of them still is in prison as a result of Matthew Cole, and he was not disciplined to my knowledge. He's certainly still on staff, raking in a big salary, I guess because he's doing a good job, and so is Scahill.
Hello and welcome to Counterpunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitser. Thanks so much for tuning in, for coming back. First-time listeners finding the show, very grateful to have you on board. Today I have the very good fortune of speaking about, well, unfortunately, one story that has not gotten the coverage that it deserves, and hopefully we'll learn a bit more about it. And, well, let's just jump right into it. We're talking about the Reality Winner case, and I'm very fortunate to be able to have Reality's mother on the show today. Billie Winner Davis is here. She's been as vocal as can be on the subject of her daughter and the treatment that she's gotten and trying to publicize this story. So very happy to have her on the program here today. Billie, welcome to Counterpunch Radio.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for having me on.
And, thank you for the good work that, of course, you're doing and trying to publicize this story, which, well, we'll get into some of the reasons why it's not getting the publicity it deserves. But before we get into all of that, I do think it's important that we get some of the background here for those who maybe only know the basic contours of this story. Tell us a little bit about Reality Winner, your daughter. Who is she, and how did we get to this point where she was the subject of, well, a miscarriage of justice, I would say?
Okay. My daughter, Reality Lee Winner, is a 27-year-old U.S. Air Force veteran. After her 6-year term in the Air Force, she was hired on as an NSA contract worker at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia. Reality was arrested on June 3rd, 2017. She was charged under the Espionage Act. She was charged with the charge of unlawfully handling classified information and disseminating national defense information. And that is under the Espionage Act. Reality has been in jail since June 3rd, 2017. She was held at a county jail there in Georgia, awaiting pretrial measures. And because they denied her bail 3 times, they said that she was a danger. They said that she possibly had more information that she was withholding. They said that, her military training, they held every single thing against her, even though, at that point we had a 25-year-old girl who had just been commended by the U.S. Air Force, who has never had, any kind of criminal history at all, but they denied her bail. And basically, throughout all of the pretrial dealings in the federal court in Georgia, the judge ruled against her and her team time after time after time to a point where they didn't have a defense. They even denied subpoenas. Her team tried to issue a number of subpoenas, and the court denied all but one. And so basically it got to the point where you had Reality sitting in jail with, no hope of winning this case. And the government, really, they were pretty strong on they wanted to put her away for 10 years on this one count. And so in July, Reality changed her plea to not guilty. She pled guilty to the one count against her. And in August, she was sentenced by the federal court, and she actually received the longest ever prison sentence for a charge under this statute for an American citizen. Reality was sentenced to 63 months in prison. After her prison term is up, she has to serve a three-year supervised release program and abide by all of the conditions. And of course, then she has a lifetime of conditions and restrictions and, loss of rights with regard to her felony conviction. So Reality, at this point, she's already spent 2 of her birthdays in prison, in jail. She is currently at a federal facility in Fort Worth, Texas, where she has been since October 2nd. And we try to keep her name out there. I have been out there on social media. I've done interviews with, any kind of outlet that I can possibly get their attention and get interest to try to keep her name out there, because her case really is, it's historical in the way that she's been treated. Even when you compare her to any other espionage type case in the United States, she has been treated far harshly than any other person in our country.
Yeah, what's fascinating about this case and her story is that, as you're kind of alluding to, or maybe implying, that it does seem, at least from an outside perspective, that this was not simply a trial based on, the accusations, the evidence, and so forth, that this was in many ways a public relations opportunity for the Trump administration to make an example of somebody, to make an example of a leaker, as Trump has talked repeatedly about, this crusade against leakers and so forth. Certainly we've seen recent examples of others who have leaked vital information. Edward Snowden is, of course, the high-profile example, but there are others. And Reality has, in some senses, been kind of made an example of, hasn't she?
Yes, she absolutely has. And in fact, thank you for bringing up the point that, Trump has really gone strong against leakers. He basically, was telling Comey, when Comey was still with the FBI, to catch the leakers. And if you recall, in Comey's memos, Comey stated, I will catch one and I will nail that one to the door as an example to others. And then shortly after that, that's when Reality was arrested. And then you had Jeff Sessions on TV, saying, we have a really good one in Georgia. And he was referring to Reality. Reality was the very first leaker that was arrested under Trump. And we see that she has been treated so differently and so severely compared to any other ones, even ones after her. And in fact, at the sentencing hearing, the sentencing memo that the prosecution filed with the court, indicated that they needed to make sure that Reality sentence was harsh enough to serve as a deterrent for any others. And the U.S. attorney gave a press release right after the sentencing hearing and basically said the same thing, again, that yes, Reality sentence had to serve as a deterrent for anyone else who was thinking about doing this.
One thing about that that's particularly galling is not simply the fact that she was made an example of. I guess in some twisted sense that there's a logic to that, unjust though it may be. But the fact of the matter is that the context within which Reality's case falls, namely exposing information about potential foreign interference in the 2016 election. I mean, this is literally the story that is dominating every single news cycle for the last 2 years. It is in every headline, every aspect of this story. Almost feels like every day we have some new perspective, some new revelations about this. And so the fact that Reality has been sentenced to prison rather than sort of lauded as a hero for bringing all of this out into the open does raise some very important questions, doesn't it?
It sure does. Yes, you're right. I mean, you bring back to the document that Reality released, the document that she leaked. The document that she leaked was the actual proof that the Russians had attempted to hack into our voting software in at least 21 states. And you would think that a leak of that type wouldn't, bring the charge of espionage upon someone. How can she be treated as a spy or a traitor when she was basically, releasing information that we were under attack from a foreign agency, from foreigners. She wasn't, colluding with anyone. She wasn't conspiring with anyone. She did this anonymously. She wasn't selling information. But yet the government used the Espionage Act against her. And they did that because it's something that they have found very useful in keeping a case quiet. Whenever they use the Espionage Act against a citizen, they basically get to withhold any information that they deem classified or sensitive from a jury, which basically, when you think about it, had Reality gone to trial, the jurors would not have ever seen the actual document that Reality had leaked. So they would not have known that her leak was in our national interest. Her leak was something to warn us. The jury would have never gotten that information. All they would have gotten from the prosecution was that this was a grave danger to our national defense, this was a grave danger to our country, and that it was classified material. They would not have known exactly what it was that Reality Winner leaked.
And I think it's important to note at this point because I know of the debates that I've had with people, including others on the left of the political spectrum as I am, about the, importance or non-importance of Russia's, what Russia may or may not have done and so forth. I think that that's somewhat immaterial in this case because ultimately whether you believe that Russia was deeply and intimately involved in meddling or just kind of on the, on the fringes or whatever you think about that issue itself, the fact that Reality brought this information out is in a sense an incredibly courageous act, an incredibly selfless one, and obviously one that she is living with the consequences of, irrespective of what you think about the political context.
That's right. That's right. And I know that, in reading the statements that she made to the FBI at the time of her interrogation and things, I know that, according to her, she didn't think about the consequences. It was just what was happening at the time, and everything that I have, read and heard, the transcript with regard to her FBI interrogation. Basically, she was trapped in a world where she was going to work every day at the NSA, and she was hearing the news come across. And the news was conflicting with the proof that was right on her computer screen. And when you imagine how frustrating that has to be day after day, and like she said, why can't this information be out there? Why aren't the American people, able to see this information?
Well, and one thing that's, interesting about it is that we still don't exactly know what it is that she, saw and what and specifically why it was, something that had to be leaked. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about very, very important information about probably one of the biggest stories of the last few decades. And the fact that she was forced to leak it in the way that she was tells you something, I think, about the institutional obstacles, roadblocks, and, dare I say, suppression of information that must have been going on, that she felt compelled to do it in the way that she did it.
Yes, absolutely. To read the documents, the court documents, she was caught in a world where there was no one that she could go to, and there was no way that she could have handled this differently. She wanted this information out there, and she took it upon herself to send it, to send it to the news outlet.
Now, tell us a little bit about Reality as a person in terms of how she thinks about things like duty and ethics and ethical behavior, because it seems that, as you said earlier, that she didn't really take into consideration anything other than just trying to get the information out there. I mean, I have to tell you, if I was in her situation, I certainly would have been thinking about consequences. I certainly would have been thinking about the danger to myself, my family, etc. So give us a little bit of insight into what kind of a person we're talking about here.
As I said, Reality was 25 when she was arrested, and Reality has always been an extremely compassionate person who gives of herself. She's very selfless. She joined the Air Force right out of high school. She wanted to serve. She did serve. What she wanted to do after the Air Force was she actually wanted to go across to the Middle East and to serve over there, but she couldn't quite get a contract that would enable her to do that. And so she took the only contract job that was available to her at that time, hoping that at some point she would be able to go over to the Middle East to serve over there as a help. In the Air Force, she did work the drone program. She was a cryptolinguist. She speaks Pashto, Dari, and Farsi. And so she did see war. You can say what you want about, the Air Force people who are the linguists and the analysts, but she was one of them that actually witnessed war during her 12-hour shifts. She gives of herself. She's extremely bright. She's very passionate about things, and she's very athletic. She teaches yoga. She teaches spinning. At the time of her arrest, she was training for her very first weightlifting competition. She does CrossFit. She was fostering a dog. She has always volunteered in every community that she's ever lived, and she just really is somebody who has always gone out of her way to make the world a better place.
Now, I know I'm sort of asking you to speculate here, but I think it's important to consider. Well, let me put it this way. I'd like to get your opinion as to why you think this story is not getting the attention it deserves. I mean, especially when you think about, those, media outlets that are openly and quite overtly, hostile to Trump and covering every aspect of Russiagate. I have seen almost no coverage. I mean, just little snippets here and there on places like MSNBC and elsewhere, which, is an incredible shame and quite an embarrassment as far as I'm concerned for all of those outlets. But I'm just curious what your take is, why you think it's so hard to get coverage of this particular person and this particular aspect of the story.
Struggled with this entire time. Like you say, MSNBC, you've got, these shows that are devoted specifically to the whole Russia investigation. While they mentioned Reality's name upon her arrest, they could at least come and circle back and just keep her still in the focus, because, I mean, she's very much the start of this story. And when the Intelligence Committee actually used the actual document leaked by Reality Winner in their findings, you would have thought again that she would have had some mention, that, hey, this is, the intel report that was leaked by NSA contractor, reality winner. I don't understand why the news doesn't keep her story and her name out there. They definitely know it. I mean, they know it, but they just don't. And I'm not sure why that is. There's a part of me that feels like, because today we are bombarded every single day with just chaos. We quickly forget what happened yesterday, because today it'll bring another mountain load of chaos and news. And so that's the way that the world that we're living in right now. But it has been terribly frustrating for me and for the very few people who have been working alongside of me from day one to make sure that we keep reality's name and story out there. It's just been so frustrating to try to, to dangle carrots in front of them, to continue to remind them. And, it's sad that we just don't get that kind of coverage.
I think one of the things that at least occurs to me in thinking about that question is sort of this institutional struggle that's happening here during this Trump administration, because you have factions within, various aspects of, the Pentagon and the CIA and the FBI and all of these different institutions, factional infighting, many of which are, opposing the president, some of which are kind of, I guess, on his side and so forth. And reality's case kind of cuts across all of those. And in some sense, it almost calls into question both sides of this narrative. And I think that in one sense, to put a light on reality's case and to, put it under the magnifying glass is in some senses an indictment of both sides of this story. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get it into the news.
Right. It could, that definitely could be one of the reasons. Another one also is I do realize that her being charged under the Espionage Act, as Jesselyn Radek will tell you, it makes you toxic. Nobody wants to run to the side of the person who's being called a traitor. And, there's also groups who don't see reality as a whistleblower. And so we've had to really, try to work to get the support of those, the people who go with the whistleblowers. And so maybe the news media just feels like she's somebody that they don't want to put too much time or credit into. I don't know. I really don't know.
So tell us a little bit about the campaign to not only bring this story to attention, but ultimately to try to free Reality Winner. I mean, what are some of the things that you guys are doing? How are you trying to build any coalitions, any grassroots support? What have you been doing in these last months and I guess 18 months or so to try to build a movement?
Okay. Well, we do have a campaign out there. It's standwithreality.org. And right now the campaign is pretty dormant. We did have a very strong sponsor that started this up for us, Courage to Resist, but they had to kind of let us go on go on our own. And so right now we're trying to rebuild the campaign. We're trying to get some people interested in volunteering to do things like newsletters, press releases, things like that, fundraising, so that we have, some things to use as far as getting her picture and her name out there. And then there's also a small band of very devoted supporters who are out there on social media every single day, on Twitter, on Facebook. I don't know if you're aware, but there was just a play that was performed in New York City by a company called Half Straddle, and they did a play based on the transcript of Reality's interrogation by the FBI agents at her home. And it was extremely powerful, and that has again picked up some interest in her story, and definitely interest in the play, because from what I hear is they're looking at expanding the play now because of the popularity and the reviews that they did get. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. We do also have, other groups that are behind us. This last week, Reality actually received an award from Blueprint for Free Speech. And that was an amazing thing for her to be given. And we've got some other groups out there that really want to start things. We have a petition out there right now, so if you go to the website, the petition's the first thing that you will see. We're also looking at the possibility of doing some other things around petitioning or meeting with our congressmen and women to ask for a review of her case, because definitely from this point forward, we definitely want to look at asking for a commutation of her sentence, and then, of course, down the road, a full pardon or restoration of rights of some kind.
I think it's important to note that it's downright shameful that certain high-profile individuals who should be rallying to Reality's support and to her side are not. People like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and others who, in theory, really should be on the forefront of all of this, but because of their hostility to the Russia story and potentially also being implicated in it, because of all of the political circumstances of this, Reality's been kind of hung out to dry, and I think that is not just tragic. I think it's really an embarrassment for much of the left, frankly. Many people that I know who are deeply hostile to the Russia story, to even examining all of this, have basically condemned Reality down the memory hole. And I think, frankly, that's it's utterly shameful and deeply embarrassing.
Yes, it is. Julian Assange was asked by a reporter early on in her case what he thought. He said he supported her, but of course there hasn't been anything, from him. I do understand he has his own battles. Snowden, this last week, actually on Friday, there was a conference, and he actually gave a pretty good talk, and most of it had to do with Reality Winner and her case. And so he does support her, and he does talk about her. So I'm grateful for that, because then it brings in, you've got a lot of groups that follow him that may not have ever heard of Reality Winner, and it maybe brings them in. Thomas Drake has spoken out in defense of Reality Winner. He actually attended her candlelight vigil that we held in Georgia on the 1-year anniversary of her arrest, which was great. John Kiriakou, Jesselyn Raddick, those are some big names in the whistleblower community, and they are also in support of Reality Winner, which I'm very grateful for.
So tell us, just in closing here, what can we do? I mean, people who are listening to this conversation, people who feel, hopefully as I do, how unjust all of this is and how badly she's been mistreated and victimized by, I think, not only institutions, but also by circumstances and, just timing and all of that. What can we do to help build this movement, to help you and those that you're working with, to try to put whatever pressure we can on the powers that be?
Basically, what we ask is that you write to your representatives. You can also go on the website and you can sign up to volunteer. Basically, you just fill out a form, and what we're looking for is people who have different skill sets, and anybody who wants to help out. Follow us on Twitter and retweet us and get your followers to follow and retweet. We just need to build the momentum.
Absolutely. And if you want to follow Billie on Twitter, it's at BJ Winner Davis. Very active Twitter account. And of course, if you're not on Twitter, just tell us again the website and any other information that you would like listeners to have.
All right. Well, the website is standwithreality.org. There's also several Facebook pages for those who are into Facebook. There's Friends of Reality Winner, and that's a closed group, but you can ask permission to join. And then there's a Stand with Reality or a Friends of Reality Winner Facebook page that you can also follow on Facebook. And there's another Twitter account. It's at Standby Reality Winner. That can be followed as well. And please just keep her name out there, because I think what's happened to her has happened because not enough people have heard the story, not enough people know her name, and therefore she is being treated the most harshly. And they only got away with that because we could not get public interest in her story.
Well, just in closing, I just want to ask that when you get a chance to just convey to your daughter that there are many of us who do follow the case, who are trying to speak on her behalf and to grow support, and that she knows that she's not entirely alone, despite the fact that much of the establishment media has abandoned her.
Oh, I really appreciate that, and I will let her know that as well. And if you want to write to Reality, the address to write to her is also on the standwithreality.org webpage.
That's great. Thank you so much, Billie, for coming on the show today and for all of the work that you're doing. And I know, obviously, the times are quite difficult for you and for your family and so forth, but, I don't know what else to say other than, be strong and keep doing what you're doing. And hopefully this is going to come to a good and speedy conclusion.
Well, I thank you so much. That means a lot. And thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in next week. This is the Washington Babylon podcast, hosted by Ken Silverstein and produced by Andrew Stewart.